masters at adaptation and survival, and few cultures prove that as clearly as the Inuit. Theirs is one of the greatest stories of survival, not just against the hardships of the life in the northernmost reaches of our planet, but also against the tides of colonization and assimilation. The Inuit don't like the name Eskimo because its real meaning is utterly heinous. The Inuit live in some of the coldest regions on Earth. Most are in Arctic Canada, but they also live in Greenland, the U.S. state of Alaska, Denmark, and Russia. In total, their population is estimated to be around 180,000 people. Inuit means the people in Inuktitut. An Inuit person is called an Inuk. This is the most commonly accepted name, but Inuit do have unique names to separate the different regions. In Greenland, they are called Kalalit, Inukho, or Id. They translate to West Greenlanders from Thule District and East Greenlanders, respectively. In Canada, they are called Inuvialuit, Inunat, and Inuit. In northern Alaska, Inuit call themselves Inuktitut, while in southwestern Alaska, they use names like Yupik and Chupik. They are also referred to as Yupik, Yupiget, and Sugpiat in Russia. In Canada, the Inuit homeland is referred to as the Inuit Ninangat, which means the place where Inuit live. There are 4 areas of the country that make up Inuit Ninangat. Nunavut, the Northwest Territories in Yukon, referred to as Inuvialuit, northern Quebec, referred to as Nunavik, and Labrador called Nunatsiavut. The Inuit language is called Inuktitut. While it is spoken throughout Inuit Ninangat, each area has their own unique dialect. Inuktitut can be written with the English language or with syllabics, where symbols represent sounds instead of letters. According to anthropologists, Inuit are the descendants of the Thule people, a group that first appears on the historical records around 1000 CE. The Thule spread across the Arctic, reaching Canada, and then Greenland by 1100 CE. The Vikings were the first Europeans that the Inuit encountered. Skraeling Island, an archaeological site in Nunavut, led to the discovery of dozens of Norse items and artwork, hinting at a prosperous system of trade between Inuit and Vikings. Around the mid-16th century, the Inuit encountered European fishermen and whalers who built whaling stations across the coast of Labrador. The Inuit didn't disrupt their business operations, but wintertime raids for tools and iron items soon became a problem for the whaling stations. With the help of missionaries from the Moravian Church, the whalers were able to put an end to Inuit raids. The missionaries gave iron and tools to the Inuit, so they no longer had to steal to obtain them. Throughout the 19th century, Inuit were valuable trading partners to the European explorers and fishermen, and even worked with the famous Hudson's Bay Company. However, while they enjoyed a peaceful relationship with these newcomers, the arrival of the Europeans would sadly prove deadly to Inuit communities. Along with the trade goods, the Europeans brought new diseases to the Inuit. With no immunity to illnesses like smallpox and tuberculosis, Inuit communities were devastated by high mortality rates. For a while, since Inuit lands were so cold and inhospitable, they were of no interest to the Canadian government. But once the government had settled the rest of the country, they turned their eye toward the north. In 1939, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that Inuit, like all other Indigenous groups, were under the jurisdiction of the Canadian government. In the ensuing years, the Inuit saw many of their traditions criminalized and snuffed out, as the RCMP was sent to enforce Canadian law and assimilate Inuit communities. With rituals like Sikitik, which was the blending of shamanism and Christianity, many Inuit were converted to Christianity. Inuit are very skilled hunters and fishermen. To survive in the Arctic, they rely on a diet that is high in protein and fat. They get most of those nutrients from fish, whales, seal, caribou, and muskoxen. Growing plants is next to impossible in the Arctic, so Inuit have traditionally foraged for greens and vegetables like tubers, roots, berries, grasses, and seaweed. In today's Inuit communities, fruits, vegetables, and milk can be imported. But because the food has to be transported across long distances, it is often very expensive, of limited availability, and not as fresh as the food from a typical supermarket. According to studies, while the traditional Inuit diet contains very little plant matter, they are still able to get adequate nutrients like vitamin C from a raw meat diet. However, despite these findings, the lifespan of modern Inuit is roughly 12 to 15 years shorter than the average Canadian. While some think this has to do with the Inuits' traditional diet, a lack of access to medical services is probably a large factor in this statistic. Facial tattoos, called kayaking, are an ancient tradition among Inuit women. For nearly 4,000 years, women have used these tattoos to signify important aspects of their community, like who their family was, where they were from, things they achieved in life, and their status in the community. Traditionally, the tattoo needles for kayaking were made out of caribou sinew that was tightly spun into a thin thread. The thread was then dipped in sweat and then used to make a tattoo through a process called skin stitching, where the ink-soaked thread is poked under the skin. Once tattooing was done, it was sterilized with a mixture of soot and urine. Nowadays, however, many people opt for a modern tattoo machine or the stick-and-poke method. When Catholic missionaries encountered the Inuit in the early 20th century, they forbade women from tattooing their faces. Fortunately, modern Inuit have reclaimed the practice, and it is seeing a resurgence in popularity. More than just a beautiful art form, Inuit facial tattoos are also connected to Inuit legends and spiritual beliefs. Many kayaking designs make reference to the sea goddess Sedna, and it's said that wearing the kayaking guaranteed a woman could go to a happy place in the afterlife. Sedna would not allow women to enter the afterlife without the tattoos, and some unfortunate souls were even sent to the land of the crestfallen, where they had to endure an eternity where their head hung down and smoke puffing out of their throat. Sedna's punishment for women without facial tattoos is harsh, but that's probably because Sedna is a vengeful deity, and rightfully so, considering how tragic her story is. There are many versions of Sedna's sad tale, but in each version, after some dispute or disaster, Sedna's father takes her out to sea in his kayak and throws her overboard. Sedna clung to the kayak, but her father chopped off her fingers, sending her sinking into the watery depths. At the bottom of the ocean, Sedna transformed into a sea goddess. Her severed fingers became the seal, the whales and walruses that the Inuit would come to rely on. To avoid Sedna's wrath, it was customary for Inuit hunters to pray for her good fortune and release animals from the depths for them to catch. In Inuktitut, people would make offerings to Sedna by throwing old harpoon heads, broken knives, and bits of meat and bone into the ocean. Traditionally, Inuit hunted sea animals from single-passenger boats called kayak. We know them as kayaks today. Inuit kayaks were covered in sealskin and impressed Europeans with their incredible buoyancy and ability to be righted while still in the seat, even if the boat was completely upside down. The umiak, or women's boat, was another important sea craft for the Inuit. These boats were large, stretching about 6 to 12 meters long, and were able to transport people, dogs, and goods. In the winter, the Inuit hunted sea animals by watching breathing holes in the ice. They would have to patiently wait for seals and walruses to come up for air. Polar bears also used this hunting technique. When it came to hunting seals and whales, harpoons were the Inuits' choice of weapon. They could use harpoons from their kayaks or while ice fishing. Dog sleds, called kamutik, were an important form of transportation for the Inuit. Sleds were made of wood, animal bones, and whale baleen. With a team of dogs, the sleds could be hauled over long treks of land or ice. In addition to transportation, dogs were important hunting companions, and were often used to sniff out seals and harass polar bears. They also guarded villages from bears and strangers. The Inuit, like powerful husky dog breeds, like the Siberian Husky, Alaskan Malamute, and the Canadian Inuit dog, the official animal of Nunavut. When at sea, Inuit used the stars to navigate. On land, they utilized natural landmarks or created Inuktitut to mark their path. Inuit of Greenland made Amasaric wooden maps, which were carved depictions of the Greenlandic coastlines. Inuit clothes were built with animal hides and furs, which kept them warm in the freezing Arctic. Caribou and seal hides were the most commonly used. It took weeks to prepare the hides for use as clothing, so these skins were incredibly valuable. As a result, instead of throwing out old clothing, it would be reused as bedding or taken apart to add new clothes. Depending on the weather and the terrain, Inuit could wear up to 5 layers of socks, boots, and overboots. Traditionally, they were made out of waterproof sealskin and warm caribou hide, but today, boots are sometimes made with heavy canvas or denim. Inuit parkas are called anorak. While the styles of these parkas vary depending on region, men's parkas tend to be looser fitting around the shoulders and with a fitted hood that could keep them warm but not block their eyesight when hunting. Women's parkas are called amauti. The back part of an amauti was built with a small place below the hood, which allowed the woman to carry a baby on her back and protect it from the cold. Igloos are a form of temporary housing that some Inuit use during the winter. They are built out of snow and used by Inuit in Canada and the Kanak region of Greenland. While igloos are made out of snow, they heat up quickly. With just a bit of body heat, an igloo can warm up to 7 or 16 degrees Celsius, or 19 to 61 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also possible to let a small fire in the igloo. The warmth inside the igloo melts a thin layer of ice that becomes insulation after it's refrozen by the cold outside. When temperatures are above freezing, Inuit live in tents called tupik. The frames for tupik are made out of wood or bone, then covered in animal skins. Some Inuit also use driftwood to make their tents. The Inuit made most of their tools out of animal bone and stones like soapstone. Walrus ivory was highly valued and used to make knives. Inuit also made tools out of Cape York meteorite. They used the meteorite for centuries, but had to stop after it was sold to the American Natural History Museum in 1883. When it comes to divvying up tasks, men usually did the hunting and fishing, while women took care of the children, looked after the home, and did most of the cooking. However, it wasn't unusual to find women out hunting, and men had to be proficient at domestic tasks like sewing and cooking, because their hunts could have them away from camp for days. Although men were responsible for most of the hunting, women were the ones who butchered, skinned, and cooked the meat. It was believed that the women's respect and care for the animals when butchering them would help the men be successful on future hunts. Because of the harsh living conditions in the Arctic, people usually relied on having a partner to survive, leading marriage to be seen as a necessity rather than a choice. To that end, Inuit marriages were usually arranged at birth. While there were cases of love marriages, even these were usually arranged by the families of the betrothed. Young women could get married any time after purity, but men had to wait until they could prove that they were skilled hunters who could support a family. While families might exchange gifts before a union, Inuit marriages were not celebrated with large ceremonies, and the couple was only truly considered married after they had their first baby. For the most part, the Inuit were monogamous, but cases of open marriages and polygamy weren't unheard of. However, it was very rare for men to have multiple wives because the scarcity of resources made it hard for a man to support more than one family. Each party in a marriage could ask for a divorce, but this was usually seen as a bad thing, since it was seen as a fracture, not just in the family, but also the whole community. A common alternative to divorce would be to trade partners with a neighbor. Because resources were scarce and communities were small, the Inuit maintained a strong culture of borrowing and lending. If someone needed food or supplies, it was frowned upon to deny them aid without a good reason. For example, if you had 2 pairs of boots and your neighbor needed one, it's expected that you'd give him a pair. But if you only had 1 pair of boots for yourself, you could decline your neighbor's plea of help. Inuit households were often made up of more than one family. It was not uncommon for people to live with their children, and parents or siblings and adoptive relatives. All food and other resources were shared among the household and the community at large. For a long time, people wrongfully believed that the Inuit engaged in the practice of senocide, that is, killing the elderly. This theory holds no weight at all, considering that elders are usually the ones who pass on the oral history and communal knowledge of a tribe. In cases of extreme cold and famine, an Inuit mother might make the heartbreaking choice to abandon her baby. This choice was not made lightly, and sometimes the babies would be lucky enough to be found and taken in by another family. Anthropologists mistakenly thought that Inuit killed babies with birth defects, but the discovery of an ancient burial site changed that theory. In the 1980s and early 90s, a storm caused massive erosion in the bluffs near Barrow, Alaska. This unearthed the remains of an ancient home and the frozen, mummified remains of a more than 800-year-old Inuit family. One of the family members was Agnayak, or little girl, and her autopsy revealed that Inuit did not leave children with birth defects to die. On the contrary, they cared for them greatly. Based on the autopsies, Agnayak and her family died of starvation, but the autopsy also showed that Agnayak had been born with a genetic defect that prevented her from being able to walk. Despite this, the state of her lungs suggested that she spent her life near her mother and the cooking fire. She was also buried with care, dressed in a warm parka alongside a small toboggan made of whalebone. Traditionally, Inuit spirituality was a form of animism, in which all things were believed to have some kind of soul. Inuit shamans are called angakuk, and they can be called on to entreat spirits for help or mediate disputes between community members. While anyone could become an angakuk, the mantle was usually taken up by men. Sometimes an angakuk might train his son to take on the shamanistic duties after him, while other times a young person might exhibit powers in the forms of dreams or with a prophecy, prompting them to be trained by the current angakuk. Unless the community was in need of spiritual help or mediation, the angakuk lived like everyone else, contributing to the community via hunting or other work. Families could call on the angakuk for their skills in divination and dream interpretation, but some form of compensation was expected for these blessings. The Inuit don't really have a formal system of laws, but there are 3 tenets that people must follow. Maligait, meaning things to follow, Pekoyait, meaning things to do, and Tirigususit, meaning things to avoid. Fighting against these tenets is thought to bring bad luck, like unsuccessful haunts, to the community. To settle disputes, the angakuk goes on a spiritual journey to find what caused all the misfortune between the angry parties. Upon returning from this journey, the angakuk would question the people involved in the dispute, and thinking that he already knew who was guilty, those being questioned would usually confess for their wrongdoings. An admission of guilt was often seen as punishment enough for most offenses. If penance was required, the person might have to clean the clan's urine pots or swap wives. While the angakuk is still a part of many contemporary Inuit communities, they aren't called on as much as they used to be in the past. Many Inuit have taken on Christian beliefs, or have even seen spiritual traditions blended with Christian concepts. Carved items are a staple of Inuit art. Historically, they would carve things out of walrus or narwhal ivory, but nowadays, soft stone like soapstone and serpentinite are preferred mediums. Miniature sculptures of humans and animals were common motifs in Inuit art. Depictions of everyday activities like whaling, hunting, and camping were popular in carvings of driftwood and bone. After the Inuit met European whalers, Inuit art and decorated tools became important trading commodities. Inuit bartered things like ivory miniatures, carvings of landscape scenes, and musical instruments in exchange for tea, alcohol, and weapons. In the 1950s, block printing has become a key medium in Inuit art. Around that time, the Canadian government encouraged Inuit in settlements to use their art as a form of income. The need to mass-produce art led to printmaking becoming more popular. Rather than using linoleum or rubber, many Inuit artists used stones for their block prints. Historically, block printers were also skilled stone carvers, but nowadays the choice of stone mostly has to do with the easy availability of it. Today, Inuit art and textiles are popular throughout Canada. The country has also adopted certain Inuit icons as national symbols, like the Inuktitut, which was displayed at the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. There are also several art galleries like the Winnipeg Art Gallery that are renowned for their collection of Inuit art. Globally, Inuit are represented by the Inuit Circumpolar Council, which is a non-governmental organization, or NGO, recognized by the United Nations. The Inuit Circumpolar Council promotes the rights and welfare of Inuit and other indigenous people. They often take a stand on environmental issues like climate change, as these issues disproportionately impact Inuit communities. In Canada, Inuit have full governance over the territory of Nunavut. Nunavut used to be considered part of the Northwest Territories until April 1, 1999, when it became its own official jurisdiction. Today, it is Canada's largest and northernmost territory. Inuit life has changed a lot over the past century. Instead of dog sleds and harpoons, most use snowmobiles and rifles. And rather than travel as nomads, settlements with opportunities for steady income have become the norm. Yet there are some things that will never change, like the enduring culture and the traditions of the Inuit. Thankfully, aspects of Inuit culture have not only seen a revival among Inuit communities, but have also become vibrant parts of non-native society. In the past, the Inuit used to be called Eskimos, but this term is considered extremely offensive. It is believed that the word Eskimo translates to something along the lines of the eaters of raw fish, which was used in a pejorative manner to distinguish Inuit from other native tribes in Canada. Since then, people use the Inuits' preferred name as a sign of respect for their culture and traditions.